In America, people like to talk about freedom. We have a lot of rights, but do we actually have freedom? As a matter of fact, can we even handle freedom at all? That's what I want to talk about in this video. So let's get into it. So guys, for those of you who've seen my face for the very first time, my name is Ivan, and I'm the host behind the travel channel, iVentures. So on this second channel, this is where you will get my most personal inner thoughts. So welcome to Ivan Tunes. So before anybody says anything to me, who is this foreigner talking about freedom? And if you don't like it, why don't you go somewhere else? Guys, I love the United States. As an immigrant here, I can't think of a better place to strive. I can't think of a better place to find a job. There's a lot of great aspects to the United States, but I want to talk about some of the perception and some of the differences that I have observed during my travels around the world. In order to have this conversation, we must define what freedom is. There are two types of freedoms, right? There are legal freedoms. You got the freedom to vote, the right to bear arms, freedom of speech. You know, these are all our constitutional rights that we have as Americans. But there's also lived freedom that include things like what is culturally accepted, social limits, how you behave in public, and what you're allowed to do with no consequences. And when you travel, your lived freedom is what you notice very quickly. So we live in the times now where you have more and more Americans traveling overseas. In fact, there is an increasing amount of Americans that are traveling and moving overseas. So that number keeps going up and up every year. Why are Americans moving? What is it about life overseas that makes people feel like they must move away from this amazing country called the United States? So let's dive into some of these things. When you travel, you start noticing things very quickly, and your perception that you had growing up in the US quickly changes. And the first thing I want to talk about is the drinking and public behavior. In the United States, the drinking age is 21. It's strictly enforced. When you go buy alcohol, even if you have a beard much bigger than mine, it is not a complete surprise that they will ask you for an ID card to verify that you are 21. In fact, they will type it on the system, and because there's a lot of people who have fake IDs, at times they even scan the ID now just to make sure 100% that you really are 21. So there's also open container laws. If you're driving, even if you are completely sober, and if you have alcohol sitting right next to you, that is a violation. And if you get pulled over, they have open container laws, and you can get a citation for that. It doesn't matter if you are drinking or not. Open containers are not to be seen in public, especially when you are driving. Guys, this is probably the only country where you encounter such laws. Most countries, I'm not sure all of them, but most countries I've been to, I think all the countries I've been to, the drinking age is 18. And not only is 18, they don't check IDs. When you go buy alcohol, in fact, in many countries, me growing up, I was asked to go buy alcohol for my parents. When I was younger, you know, they just give you money and go tell you, go buy me a six-pack of whatever. And you just go to the store. You could be 11 or even 12 years old, and you just buy the stuff and then you walk home with the alcohol. At no point did the person selling you that alcohol actually think that you will be consuming it. At no point does it think that it's a problem, because it's understood that, hey, if you are here buying it, it's probably an adult that's sending you to purchase it. So there's kind of like this societal trust that takes place. Also, I went to Portugal not too long ago, guys, and I went to a store to buy wine. You know, I was walking around in Lisbon, and when I bought that bottle of wine, I was expecting the person to give me a container, you know, where I would actually put my bottle and then walk around the street with it. But what ended up happening is he gave me the bottle and he just handed it to me. And I was surprised, because I was like, wait, where's my bag? You know, I was expecting a brown bag. And he's like, what's wrong? I said, can I get a brown bag? I forgot for a second where I was, and he said, oh, you must be Americans. He's like, no, don't worry about it. You know, you can completely walk around, you know, holding your bottle. It doesn't matter. In fact, you know, I can open, if you have some beer, I can open it here, and you can walk down the street and drinking it. It doesn't matter. Guys, you're not allowed to drink alcohol here publicly. with very few exceptions, okay? Which we'll get into later on in the video. But you're not allowed to consume alcohol publicly, and if you hold it, it must be covered. So I'm no, that is something, when you live somewhere, that's a big deal. You feel less restrained, you feel less controlled. And it really matters, when you're talking about, your sense of freedom, because as we can talk about, freedom of speech in the United States, right? You have to be careful. Even in this very platform, YouTube, I don't have to say something that's outrageous, but there are certain speeches, there are certain themes that if you engage in this platform, they will terminate your channel. There are certain videos that if you bring up certain subjects, the algorithm itself is set up to not push that content. You know what I mean? There are certain topics that just not allowed here. And it doesn't have to be something outrageous. It just has to be against their rules, the policy, or whoever the stockholders behind this company believe is right or wrong. If you speak against it, you will suffer the consequences. Now, depending on who's in power in the United States, we've also observed some YouTubers or journalists getting penalized for exercising their freedom of speech, right? You can think of very extreme political commentators who simply express their opinions. And if it's the left in power, the right gets penalized. And now we're seeing if the right is in power, there's also certain type of journalists who are getting in trouble for the very speech that they believe they have the right to. So freedom of speech comes with a caveat. Not long ago, I was coming back from China and I talked to a friend of mine and I told him, look, I really had a great time in China. And he's like, I can never live in China. And I asked him, what is it? Because I know he's never been there. And it's crazy how people have very strong opinions about places that really they don't know much about except what they watch on TV. And he told me, well, I don't like their lack of freedom of speech. And I told him, the only thing really you're not allowed to do is talk trash about the government. And I think for all the great things that China has, I can do without, the ability to talk trash about the government, Because again, even in this country, you have to be careful, how you talk about government matters online. That may come to a severe price to you. I am not saying that the United States is like China. I'm just saying that sometimes the perception that people have when it actually comes down to it, it's very different. Another right that Americans are very proud of, and you hear often, is that we have the right to bear arms. Contrary to popular belief, less and less Americans are actually purchasing weapons. But the people who already have guns seem to buy more and more. So yes, there's more weapons being sold, but it's sold to the few that already have them. You guys can check that, I'm not making it up. So less new Americans feel the need to buy guns, but the ones that do feel the need to buy more and more and more weapons. So I don't know how you guys feel about guns. Regardless, it doesn't matter. It's just one of the rights that we have. But does having a gun really make a difference in your life? I don't know. I think that in many countries around the world, because of different reality of safety, people have a completely different perception about their need to own weapons. But what I'm discussing in this video are things that you actually notice in your daily life, Walking around Shanghai and going to different night venues, I've noticed that there's no security at the entrance of clubs. I can't speak for the whole country. I've been to several cities, but I didn't notice anybody checking your ID card when you walk in the club, So whether you were 21 or 22 or actually 18 or younger, there was nobody there to tell you, oh, you're not allowed to come here because you're underage or whatever. I believe the drinking age in China is 18. I believe, I'm not so sure. But again, it's not something that is strictly enforced. And that is the same thing if you go to places like Colombia, if you go to the vast majority of European countries. I have never been asked once in my life to deliver an ID, So is it a big deal? No. But again, just talking about that sense of freedom that you feel when you travel overseas. So what these countries rely on is social awareness instead of strict enforcement. So in the US, we're talking about public consumption of alcohol. There are a few places here where you can do that. We all have seen, this never fails. Year after year, places like Miami, Florida during spring break, where a lot of young people go out there, and I think they're allowed to drink in certain streets over there. Definitely is the case in New Orleans. And the police presence is right there. And despite that, there's people that involve themselves in fighting, verbal assault, attacks. Some people get severely injured in these attacks. And it's like, what is it about alcohol that makes people act a fool like this? you know? And this type of behavior, that type of people, when they travel to foreign countries, they do the exact same things. I've seen videos of people in the middle of Medellin, Colombia, probably one of the happiest place on earth, and people are fighting in the middle of the street, you know, and it's like, what is going on? I still don't understand what is it that makes people act a certain way. And it's not just like drinking a little bit, it's drinking so much that they get extremely intoxicated and engage in this violent behavior. So guys, I hate to say this, when you are black and traveling, a lot of people in many countries already have a certain perception about how you people behave. And it's like, when you go overseas, you need to be mindful of that. And if you engage in the very behavior that people think people like you behave, then you continue to push this narrative that black people are this way or that way. You know what I mean? So me personally, I am extremely careful when I travel, especially in certain countries, you know, to make sure that I break those stereotypes. I break that narrative. You know what I'm saying? And that leads me to my next point, which is about spicy activities. The United States, we produce the highest number of spicy movies in the world, right? But engaging in that behavior off camera is illegal. I have to be careful how I use my words in this platform. So you travel around the world and you realize that, you know, let me just say ashawo. That's the word that they use in Africa. It's legal to be an ashawo, all right? And if you are one, many times it comes with protection, it comes with insurance, it's a normal job. You know, and it comes to a big shock to a lot of people when they travel to places like Brazil, to places like Germany, to places like Thailand. What do they observe? They observe all of this freedom and they completely lose their minds. You know, places have been there for a very long time and they don't have an issue with the locals participating in that in those activities. But what happens when a high number of foreigners start coming in the country, not only do they consume it, but they film it, they publicize it, they make videos about it, they promote it, it leads to a change in law. So when I was asking the question earlier, can we even handle freedom? You know, recently, Colombia, the country, has decided to enforce the checks at the airports. So if you are an American or foreigners in general, and you are landing in Colombia, whether you land in Bogota, Cartagena, Medellin, Colombia, regardless of where you land, they would check, they could check your suitcase. They could verify, first of all, why you're coming in the country, for what activity, what brings you in the country. Secondly, don't be surprised if they take you in the back, check your phone and check your suitcase. A friend of mine was shocked when I told him that at the airport, you have no expectation of privacy. Crossing a border, they have the right, even in the United States, this is an international law, they have the right to check your phone. It comes to a big surprise. They don't always do it, but don't be surprised if they do. They have the right to check your phone. So if you have things on the phone that leads them to believe that you are engaging in a certain type of activity that they are trying to discourage, they will send you right back to your country on the next flight. But why is this happening? It wasn't like this before. I personally blame it on the fact that people have taken this whole freedom thing a little bit too far. It's one thing to go to a country and enjoy what's available. It's something else to advertise it. And no country in the world wants to be known for those type of things. It happens in the country. People have been going to those countries for a long time. And never has this been such a big deal on the internet. And with YouTube becoming more and more popular and more YouTubers coming out there and filming videos, you can understand the image that these countries believe is getting tarnished. And what impact is it going to have on the next traveler? You know, this is the problem. Can we handle freedom? In the US, if you want to partake in these activities, there are very specific venues like, you know, we all heard of Nevada. Some people think in Las Vegas is illegal, but it's actually not. The Bunny Ranch is a place where Lamar Odom, the famous Lakers player, shout out to Lamar Odom, went to a few years back. And enjoying the ladies was one thing. Taking the alcohol was another. And then he had to take some snow too, I believe. Allegedly engaged in this kind of behavior that led to him having a severe heart attack. You know, he's lucky to be alive today. But he couldn't just enjoy either the woman or the alcohol. That wasn't enough. He had to do a trio of things and therefore, you know, almost lose his life. And this is what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? You're hearing more and more and more Americans going in these countries and getting caught up on these things. I've seen videos of people in Colombia getting stopped at the airport with a suitcase full of toys. And by toys, I'm not talking about baby toys. Use your imagination. But is it wrong to carry those things? No, probably isn't. But there's a problem. If your entire suitcase is full of it, you know what I mean? That's a problem. Are you okay? You know, it's like Cartagena. I've seen videos of people engaging in adult activities on the balconies in public because either they've never been with a woman before, the whole world has to know that they are hooking up with a female. What is really the big deal? There's this label that they even throw out there now, passport bros. Almost like this is a new thing to travel. People have been traveling forever. But what is it that when we start traveling, we have to come up with this name? And then they quickly turn into a negative, connotation. What is it? What is it? And people wonder what's wrong with us. That's one of the reasons why I'm making this video, because as a black male, I feel like now when you travel, people assign labels to us very quickly. And that is because of the actions of a few who just can't control themselves. I'm wondering, do you believe your city-state or the United States would be safer or would be more fun if there was less violence and if you could partake in any type of activities that you truly wanted to without disrupting your neighbor? Without disrupting your neighbor. And it was completely okay. Do you think this country would be better? Sometimes I wonder why certain things aren't legal here, but then you see the way people behave when they do have access to that freedom, and you ask yourself, what is going on in our heads? Is the fact that there are so many rules makes us feel like, when we finally have a little taste of that lived freedom that I mentioned in the beginning, people just completely lose their mind. What is it? I don't have the answer to that question, but maybe you guys let me know in the comments. Do you believe America will be better if we had the same freedom as a country like Brazil, Colombia, Switzerland, France, Thailand? I don't know, but let me know in the comments below. The next point is the power of social media, and it's tied into this subject because many times people tend to exaggerate things, So the only way to truly know what it's like is to actually travel to the country. So with no exaggerations at all, I want to know from you guys watching these videos who have traveled to foreign countries, do you feel that you have more freedom in the United States, or do you feel like you have more freedom overseas? So guys, I'm really curious, what's more important to you? Being able to talk trash about your government, being able to just basically do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't disrupt your neighbor? Do you believe it will be better for you? Because I'm trying to figure out basically what is it that makes people move more and more overseas. If America is the land of freedom and the land of opportunities, why are more and more Americans leaving? In many foreign countries, people don't have strict rules because the people know and they have more discipline, you know what I'm saying? And in many times in the United States, it feels like if we don't have these strict rules in place, things can go left very fast. So that's why we have a lot of these rules. But what is it that makes us this way? In many countries in Europe, for example, when I mentioned alcohol, people can drink at a younger age, but you won't go to these clubs and pubs and you see people fighting. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Personally, I have never witnessed a drunk fight in Europe. And I have traveled to Europe many, many times, but I have never witnessed that once. So what is it about the United States that makes us engage like that? Once we have a little bit of freedom, you can drink alcohol in the United States, of course you can. But what is it that once we actually do drink, it makes us get violent like this? Why are people fighting in Miami every year? Why are people fighting in New Orleans? Once there's a little bit of freedom, people lose their mind. People discover the freedom that I mentioned in Colombia, and as soon as they do, they start going overboard, disrespecting the place, engaging in behaviors publicly that, people aren't used, to seeing. And therefore the rules change. And now with social media and the impact that it has, the country have to change the rules. Guys, when you travel, you are a guest in the country. So whatever you do will be amplified by the locals because you are a foreigner. And it has an impact in the way people look at you. it has an impact in the way people will look at people that come from the same country they knew, the same skin complexion, foreigners in general. It's really sad for me to travel and to realize that places have changed or changing because some people just can't control themselves. We don't see that behavior in many other countries. We introduced that, excessive fighting and excessive drinking, and it just leads to these problems. And it changes the way people see us. It changes the rules. It changes the laws. So if I can ask for anybody who's watching me, who's on YouTube, just because we have the right to film certain things, maybe just don't film it at all. Certain things that happen in countries, people don't want it to be shown. And it's your right to film it. But if you like what you are filming and filming it is going to change the rules, why film it to begin with? There's certain things that must stay private and remain private. So it's frustrating that, when a place becomes very popular, it doesn't take long. We all heard about how the Dominican Republic has changed. I've never been there, but I've heard, certain things happen there that is no longer really happening, or they're cleaning up or whatever. But these things has been there forever. What's changing is the number of videos that are coming out, and people feel like, let me tell the whole world that they love us here. Let me tell the whole world that this is happening here. There's certain things that are happening in the countries, and the politicians are aware that it's happening. Matter of fact, they have legalized it, but they don't want the country to be known for that. And I think that as YouTubers, we have the responsibility to safeguard those countries' reputations. You can denounce something you don't like if that's the type of content you make, but some of this content is borderline disrespectful, and some countries are not okay with that. And more rules are going to change. The right to film when you travel, is it a job, is it not? They're finding ways to discourage, YouTubers from even going to the country and filming certain things. But it's because people just can't help themselves when they go out to these countries and film these things that basically make the locals upset about us and make the locals feel like, we need to do something to discourage these people. The other thing I want to talk about is the power of money and the perception that it gives you. Many times because you have more buying power, more money, you feel like you are better off than somebody else. That is a common theme here in the US, because generally speaking, people are better off here because it's, a lot easier to get a job, to get gainfully employed, to buy a car and all these material things. We mistake that access to actual freedom and happiness, but it's not the same thing. We have people around the world who have a lot less money than people here in the United States, yet they have more freedom and they are happier. So it's for everybody to decide and define what freedom they value the most. And we're not going to all agree, right? Some people feel like this is not a necessary thing for their happiness, and no matter what you tell them, they will never get on the plane and travel to a foreign country. It doesn't matter what you say. And for others, it's actually a big deal, and they choose to travel. They love to travel, and they travel more. As a matter of fact, many people are moving out, like I mentioned earlier. So this is not a one size fits all, and everybody's different. There are people that I know in the US who have money, and they choose not to travel at all. They don't care what you say. They're happy here. We're not all the same. But this is for people who have at least that intellectual curiosity of what life is in other countries, and really ask yourself the question, why do we behave this way? Can we handle real freedom? Because when people can handle certain things, they move differently. You know what I mean? They don't feel the need to brag. They don't feel the need to advertise, to showcase certain things that countries, quite frankly, don't want you to show. What kind of person are you? Are you more into the strict discipline, or are you more into social acceptance, where we trust that you are okay drinking, we trust that, you are okay walking around intoxicated, because even being intoxicated publicly in the United States is a violation. I can't think of another country where it doesn't matter if you're bugging somebody. Just the mere fact that you are sitting here and you are intoxicated, you're breaking the law. I can't think of another place that's like that. But these rules are in place because I believe the government doesn't trust us, that we are able to handle ourselves appropriately. And quite frankly, when you travel and you see the way some people behave, you start wondering, maybe they do the right things in the United States by having these barriers in order to discourage the type of behavior, because we don't seem to be able to handle these freedoms? Well, there's a reason why the United States has all those rules. The United States has a huge population, huge. And not just a huge population, because China has a huge population as well. Well, the US has not only a huge, but diverse population. With people coming from all over the world, with different type of cultures and behaviors. This country has put in place, strict guidelines and rules in order to discourage a certain behavior, also because of past problems. So these guidelines that are put in place in the United States, these barriers are completely taken down when you travel. And what do we see? People engaging in the behavior that I have discussed. They do things publicly that isn't allowed. They engage in adult activities for everybody to see. They are screaming and shouting and fighting, and they are doing things that, quite frankly, people from those countries don't do. What's impressive about China, but the Chinese example, you have to keep in mind, is a homogeny. The vast majority of the people there look exactly the same. So it's a lot easier because homogeneous societies tend to have less problems. So when people travel to these countries, either is in Asia, somewhere in Thailand or whatever, and they engage in behaviors that the locals aren't used to, it makes people wonder, wait a second, maybe we need to change the rules here. And we end up exporting behaviors that we are running away from in those countries that we go to. So if you don't like something and you want to enjoy something somewhere else, why do you take that behavior you dislike and export it to a foreign country? This happens all the time. This happens all the time. I also want to touch up a little bit on the passport bro, phenomenon. This is nothing new. The so-called passport bros are not discovering anything new. These countries have been that way forever. These freedoms have been available before they were even alive. But what's different now is more amplified because people have access to social media. YouTube is more popular, and therefore they're pushing this narrative out there more and more. And it's frustrating, people in those countries. There's nothing new in Poland. You're not showing anything new in Thailand when it comes to nightlife. You're not showing anything new in Colombia. These places have been that way forever. But with cameras and YouTube and, so-called passport bros, disrupting the normal course of things, places are changing. It's almost like a blessing nowadays to be able to go to a country that people haven't really advertised yet online. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to talk about countries, but there's a difference between talking about your experience and just promoting a certain type of behavior, first of all, that the locals won't appreciate, just in order to brag and show off to the people that are back home. It's personally, as a traveler, it's something that's very frustrating. I think that, it's our responsibilities as travelers and more so as YouTubers to safeguard the reputation of those countries with the videos that we are promoting out there. So guys, this is not about saying some countries are more free than others. Everybody is different and we all value, different things. For some people, the right to bear arms is the absolute most important freedom that they want in their lives. They want the ability to own that weapon and, buy more with no restrictions. For others, the freedom might mean something completely different. So true freedom is internal. Only you watching this video know what's important to you and what matters the most in your life. But this is just a conversation in order to discuss some of the freedoms that certain countries provide that come to, let's say, a complete shock to American travelers when they go, overseas, and have this open dialogue about what matters the most in your life. What country do you think fits to you the most? It's a trade-off. What matters the most in your life? America provides definitely the most amount of opportunities, but make no mistake, freedom, comes with a price. And in order to safeguard the public, this country has put in place certain rules because of the behavior of individuals here, whereas in other countries, it's not necessarily the case. So people seem to be a little bit more apt and able to handle the freedom that their country provides. What do you think is more important? Do you prefer life in the United States and the freedom that America provides, or do you prefer the freedom that is available in places like Colombia, Brazil, Thailand? I can go on and on and on and on and on about some of the most popular destinations today. I want to hear your feedback, guys. Do you believe most Americans are actually able to handle some of the freedom I've discussed here? Or do you think we are just doomed and we just can't control ourselves? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I can't wait to hear your feedback. And on that note, if you enjoyed the content, kindly hit that like button, subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.
System built to drain them, then laugh inside the court. I was one of y'all, dreams boxed in a concrete cube. Felt like crime made me weak, so I numbed it with some food. Tried loving in America, but it felt like war. Be a man, but if I leave, she walking out the door. They told me freedom's in the vote, but I found it in the visa. They said real men stay and fight, but I ain't trying to please. I write these lines for the
I have a lot more videos on the other channel. Guys, go ahead and subscribe to our adventures and Ivan Tunes, and let's continue this journey together. All right, let's go.
These are my letters from the Matrix. To my brothers trying to fake this. You ain't big